So my sub-lesson number 8 is that the old and the venerable doesn't actually mean that they're effective. And I think that we need to have an honest review as to what is the best possible stuff that comes out of the board, what is the best stuff that comes out of the JLC, and try and find a way forward in terms of creating a body which everybody can be proud of, and they can at least end up criticising one body instead of criticising sort of two. The plethora of charities and lack of prioritisation. I've said to you they're unaffordable because of funds and skills. But I want to say something much more profound to you, that they're a tyranny on the donor community. That every single time somebody starts a new charity, they add to the tyranny of the donors. There is a limited number of people who consistently give in this community. And those people are every day approached for new gifts. And it's simply not fair, and it's not right. And at some point in time, I had a meeting a few weeks ago with some people in the community where it was suggested to me that yes, if there's a good thing to be funded, we'll raise the money. And the reality is that that's actually not true. We have a project in Redbridge. Redbridge has a school, King Solomon. King Solomon is going through a metamorphosis. We are changing the whole educational setup there. We are revitalizing that whole complex. It needs money to be spent. I can't find one person to step forward in the community other than the 4 or 5 people who are the mainstays of funding this community at the moment to fund it. I get crap from the foundations who think they know better. Individuals who tell me that's not their business. Other people who've given millions of pounds to non-Jewish education institutions say, well, I don't know the area, and therefore I'm not sure that I want to contribute and stuff like that. And it's because people are beginning to rebel. Donors are beginning to rebel against this. And prioritization, therefore, is critical. We need to find a way where we can prioritize where communal money goes to. So sub-lesson number 9 is that fragmentation disempowers donors, whose only defense ultimately is to decrease their give. And we're seeing the result of that today. Fewer people are giving today than gave before, and this community is much wealthier than it ever has been. So my next lesson in communal leadership is the question of the leadership is about values. And our religion and our people is about values. And it's, Pesach, which starts on Monday night, is a festival of values, where a bankrupt and destroyed community whose degradation down the moral curve was almost complete at the time of the exodus from Egypt, stepped forward into a world where they embraced a set of values which was perhaps revolutionary for the time. And these same values are the values that we as a Jewish people reflect today. And our leadership should always be about those values. And there's lots of those values, but I'm going to give you a couple which may not, in fact, be the sort of morally virtuous values that we subscribe to, as important as they are, but some of them will be. The first of all is the value of care. And I'm going to talk about care in a very particular context now. And second is the value of accountability, doing what we promise. There's 2 important values which I think underpin Jewish leadership today. That if we are not going to do it with care, and we're not going to do it with accountability, we're sort of wasting our time. So what is the issue of care? And care is on a fundamental basis, and it's the ethos of the Jewish religion, and when Hillel, as you know, was asked, what is the religion? And he said, well, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the religion, the rest is commentary. That sums up essentially the essence of what Judaism is all about, and the proposition that we brought to the world, that you can't find God unless you find your fellow man first. And that obviously is a fundamental principle that I think that we should internalize in our leadership thing, that we care. We care obviously for the people in this community, we care about the things that they need. But I want to talk about care in one particular aspect, and that is, in a couple of aspects. The first one is, because I want to lead it into the practical and not the philosophical, and that is that we don't hoard cash. Leadership is not about hoarding cash. too many organizations in our community have too much cash in their balance sheets. Other organizations live from hand to mouth. If you've raised too much money, you should give it back to the community. And that is not happening. And that's a failure in leadership. And that's a failure of care. It's a failure in the value of care. So that's the first proposition I want to leave with you. Secondly, we don't hog positions in leadership. If you stay in a leadership position for too long, I said it in a different context, I say it now in this context, you're showing a lack of care. Because you're crowding out talented people from coming into your place. And we've lost people as a result of our brothers staying in for too long. Leadership should be about an evolution and a revolution all the time in terms of bringing talent through. And the third thing is that we should try and limit our criticism and maximize our praise. This is a community which is fantastic in criticism. I open up the JC or the Jewish News or whatever, and I just see rafts of criticism. Everybody's criticizing. Letters, editorials, commentary in the newspapers, and all that sort of stuff. Nobody wants to praise. Nobody wants to actually build people up. They always want to tell people where they've gone wrong. That is, again, is a failure of care and a failure of leadership. So sub-lesson number 10 is that you can only show care if you're constantly hearing what people are saying, and hearing what the community is saying, and listening to that. In other words, acting on it. And so much of our leadership is, in fact, asking people to hear what they say. And that's a big mistake. I'm guilty of that as much as anybody else is. The second aspect of values is the question of accountability. And I look at accountability as that we do what we say we are going to do, which means, of course, that we mustn't overpromise, but we must have a promise, and we must live by that promise. So people are entitled to have the expectation of doing that. And that we will be accountable, and we will hold ourselves accountable. And if we haven't delivered, we will actually either exit, or we will actually demonstrate to the community that we're going to do something about it to deliver. And I think that the important thing here is that you have to be consistent in your communication with the community. You have to set a very clear set of goals that you're going to achieve, and you have to consistently go back and tell them how you're measuring up against those goals. Nothing else, to my mind, satisfies. And that's the only honest and important way of doing that. So sub-lesson number 10 is basically communication is the road to credibility. And the JLC's failure in the early years is that it was grotesquely bad and poor at communicating. It didn't feel that it needed to communicate. And it's paying a price even today as a result of that great failure. So it's important that you constantly communicate, because if you don't, you run the risk that other people will tell your story for you, and they'll tell it in the way that they believe it should be told, and it might not be the way it should be told. So don't let other people take your story. It's your story, you've got to tell it. You've got to take charge of it. Now we're coming to my last and my fifth session in leadership. No cash, no leadership. The leader is the primary fundraiser in any organization, in any endeavor. But also, if there's no askers, there's no givers. And big ideas raise money. So when I say that the leader is the primary fundraiser, if you can't canvas, go home. It's just as simple as that. Unfortunately, this is a community of people who don't like to canvas. I don't know why we don't like to canvas. People get embarrassed. If you go and ask somebody for money and he says no, you feel, oh God, that's awful. You've got to remember one simple thing, and this is not a lesson on canvassing, is you're not asking for yourself. You're asking for a cause, you're asking for an ideal, you're asking for an organization. They're saying no, they're not saying no to you, they're saying no to the cause and the organization, and it's their problem that they've said no, not your problem. And finally, generally speaking, you need to ask somebody at least 3 or 4 times before they're going to give you money. And most people give up on the second time. So if they went back the third time, they'd get it. But my basic principle is if you're not prepared to canvas, you can't be the leader, and you will just simply stay at home. And that applies to everything. You've got to bring your passion and you bring your knowledge to that proposition. So you can't raise money unless you're knowledgeable about the thing that you're raising money about. And you have to set an example. Leaders have to pay up. Now I know that some people have different capacity to others. Nobody expects the person who is earning £40,000 a year to give the same amount of money or the person who's earning £500,000 a year, or the person who's earning £1 million a year. But they're asking the same question of the person who's earning £40,000 a year. Are you paying up in the context of your capacity to give? Every leader must be seen to be giving just a little bit beyond what his reasonable capacity is. That's the way you set the example on your giving. That's your credibility, that's your credible proposition when you go in to talk. You say, I'm giving this. You therefore can give that. And if I can do it, you can do it. And that's the way you have to go about doing that business. So sub-lesson number 12 is that people respond to example on giving. But the one thing they don't respond to, and I've had this when I was talking to a previous chairman of the board of governors of the school that my kids go to, when he came and asked me to give money to an extension of the school, which I did, I was happy to give it. And I asked him, and how much are you giving? And he said, well, I give my time. And I said, that's simply not good enough. Yeah, that simply is just not good enough. You cannot come and tell me that you give your time. He said, well, I can't give, I don't earn as much money as you. I don't have your money. I said, I'm not asking you to give what I'm giving. I'm asking you, nevertheless, to show me that you're giving to the capacity that you should be giving as a leader of this organization. Don't tell me about time. We all give our time. It's not good enough. If you want to raise money, you've got to go that extra step. No askers, no givers. I mean, Trevor Chin, if you ever get Trevor, he'll tell you that all the time. And Trevor will give you an absolute masterclass on how to raise money and how to go about it. But let me just say a few things about this that people don't give unless they're asked. Very few people will sort of wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I have to write out a check and send it in. It just doesn't happen. It's just not life. Most people will give if asked. They sometimes won't give what you think they should give, but they will give it if asked. So as a leader, the most important thing is to build your asking team. And one of the big mistakes I made when I took over as chairman of the UJA was at the same time, because of confluence of events, it took place at the same time that the asking team basically sort of imploded. I lost my biggest askers sort of overnight, not because I became chairman, it's just because that was it. I didn't spend enough time investing in building a new cadre of askers, and as a result, we are still facing issues today. So sub-lesson number 13 is make it easy for your askers. Have a compelling message and a simple message to allow them to go out and make that connection. And my last point in the question of no cash, no leaders, is that it's big ideas that in fact raise money from philanthropists. It's not managing the costs. Now we spend a lot of our energies in making sure that our charities are efficient and effective. And I'm going to say to you, that's maybe is a sort of a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. And the last thing I'm going to say to you, and so I'm going to say, it's important that you manage costs. It's important that you're efficient. It's important that you don't have wastage. But that's not going to get people to give you money. It's the big idea that's going to capture their minds. It's the thing which they can actually relate to and say, I buy into that. I'm connected to that. That excites me. That inspires me. Yeah, and that's what you have to do. You have to find the big idea, the big proposition. And so when you get into your boards of trustees and you've got a predominance of discussion about how we're going to cut costs because we're not raising enough money, essentially what you'll end up, you start with cutting costs and therefore cutting programs and cutting the ideas, and so you get less and less money, and it becomes a sort of a definite spiral into the void of nothingness. What you have to turn around to your boards of trustees is, what is the big idea? What can we do to capture the minds of the donor community? What is this that's going to get them to give us their money? And so my last sort of sub-lesson, number 14, is that effectiveness always trumps efficiency.